18 hours ago, a ceasefire was announced. Oil dropped 12%. Markets celebrated. And while every financial headline declared peace, Iran's parliament speaker was quietly listing 3 specific ways America had already broken the deal, before negotiations even started. The Strait of Hormuz opened for 3 hours, then closed again. Lebanon is still being bombed. 8 American allies just publicly called out Washington's own ceasefire terms. This is not peace. This is both sides buying time to reload, and markets have no idea. Hit subscribe to War Room Economics right now. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from. We read every single one. Now here is what nobody is telling you. Let me start with the number that explains everything. Oil dropped 12% on ceasefire news. That 12% drop represents trillions of dollars in market movement based on one assumption: that this ceasefire is real. Here is what that assumption is missing. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, did not congratulate anyone. He did not appear at a press conference with handshakes and flags. He posted on X and named 3 violations, one by one. Violation 1. Continued Israeli strikes on Lebanon. Hundreds of casualties since the ceasefire announcement, after the deal was supposed to begin. Violation 2. A drone detected in Iranian airspace after the ceasefire took effect. Violation 3. American demands to end Iran's uranium enrichment program entirely, a demand Iran says was never part of any agreement. Ghalibaf wrote it directly. America's deep historical pattern of violating commitments has been repeated once again. The workable basis for negotiation has been violated before negotiations even began. In such a situation, a bilateral ceasefire or negotiations is unreasonable. That is the parliament speaker of the country. The ceasefire is supposed to involve saying the deal is already dead. Markets dropped oil 12% on that news. The repricing has not happened yet, but it is coming. But here is where this story becomes genuinely dangerous, because the 3 violations are not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that nobody involved in this ceasefire agrees on what it actually covers. And when you see the 3 different answers you get from the 3 people who matter most, you will understand why this deal was structurally broken before it was signed. 1 ceasefire, 3 completely different versions of what it says. Pakistan brokered the deal. Pakistan's official position is that Lebanon is included, full stop. President Trump said publicly that Lebanon is not included because of Hezbollah. He called continued Israeli bombardment of Lebanon a separate skirmish. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the strikes on Lebanon are part of the deal, not separate from it, authorized by it. The mediator says Lebanon is in. America says Lebanon is out. Israel says bombing Lebanon is what the agreement allows. All 3 cannot be right. And while those 3 positions contradict each other, Lebanon's health ministry has been counting casualties in the hundreds since the moment the ceasefire was announced. 8 nations noticed the contradiction immediately. Germany, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Spain, the Netherlands, and Canada issued a joint statement. Their demand was direct: implement the ceasefire, including in Lebanon. 8 of America's closest allies publicly contradicting American ceasefire terms 18 hours after the announcement. European Council President Antonio Costa said civilian populations require a swift and lasting end to the war. When your own allies are correcting your ceasefire terms in a joint statement the day after you announced it, the diplomatic foundation is not cracking. It was never there. And then the Strait of Hormuz happened, the one thing this entire ceasefire was supposed to fix. It opened, markets breathed. Then 3 hours later it closed again. And the reason Iran gave for closing it tells you exactly how Tehran is reading the Lebanon situation. Here is what actually happened. The Strait of Hormuz carries 21% of global oil consumption every single day. The ceasefire was announced. The first tankers began moving through. For roughly 3 hours, the strait was open. Then Iranian news agencies reported traffic had been halted again. Iran's stated reason was direct: Israeli strikes continuing in Lebanon. The message from Tehran required no translation. Stop bombing Lebanon or the strait stays closed. Iran then announced that any vessel passage now requires direct coordination with Iranian armed forces. Read that carefully. That is not reopening the strait. That is maintaining full Iranian control over the waterway while allowing selective traffic with Iranian permission. Trump said America would help manage the traffic buildup. But the question nobody in the White House answered is how. U.S. naval escorts through waters where Iran just reasserted authority is not ceasefire implementation. That is a confrontation with a logistics layer added on top. The economic fundamentals that caused oil to drop 12% have not changed by one single factor. Iran still controls the choke point. The blockade is functionally intact, and the money that moved on ceasefire news is sitting on a foundation that does not exist. But the Hormuz situation only makes sense when you understand what Iran and America actually want from this negotiation. Because when you put their 2 proposals side by side, the word compromise becomes impossible. These are not two sides haggling over a price. These are two sides who want completely opposite outcomes. Let me show you exactly what each document says. Iran submitted a 10-point peace proposal. According to NBC News reporting, it includes 3 core demands: full withdrawal of all American combat forces from regional bases, complete lifting of all sanctions against Iran, and continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. That is what Iran wants. America out of the region, sanctions gone. And Iran keeping the key to 21% of global oil. America's 15-point plan, according to administration sources, demands 3 things in return: complete and verified cessation of Iran's uranium enrichment program, withdrawal from all proxy conflicts across the region, and unrestricted commercial shipping access through Hormuz without Iranian conditions. These documents do not describe a negotiation. They describe 2 incompatible visions of what the Middle East looks like in 10 years. Iran wants American military retreat from the region. America wants Iran stripped of its nuclear program and its proxy network. Pakistan brokered a ceasefire between 2 parties whose fundamental objectives cannot coexist in the same agreement. The 14-day clock Pakistan started is not a path toward peace. It is a countdown toward the moment when both sides formally acknowledge what every analyst reading these documents already knows: this deal was never going to hold. And here's the part markets are not pricing at all. Both sides know this too, which means both sides are using these 14 days for something other than diplomacy. Because while diplomats exchange proposals, something specific is happening on the ground right now that tells you more about where this is heading than any official statement. Both sides are using the ceasefire as cover to rearm, cover to reposition, cover to prepare. And the evidence is not hidden. It is in plain sight. Iran's uranium enrichment program has not paused. It is continuing during negotiations. NBC News confirmed the internet blackout inside Iran has entered its 40th consecutive day, despite the ceasefire announcement. A government that was genuinely committed to peace would lift an internet blackout as a confidence-building gesture. Iran has not. Revolutionary Guard forces are at full operational readiness. The IRGC issued a threat of a regret-inducing response over Lebanon strikes and publicly called America a partner to a brutal regime. That is not the language of a military standing down. American forces have not withdrawn from a single regional position. Israeli strikes in Lebanon are intensifying, not pausing. Netanyahu said it himself. This is not the end of the campaign. For China, these 14 days are an intelligence window. American attention is divided between Middle East negotiations and every other global commitment simultaneously. For Russia, 8 European nations publicly disagreeing with American ceasefire terms is information that feeds directly into Ukraine calculations. For North Korea, watching America negotiate under military pressure is a masterclass in how to extract concessions without changing behavior. Every American adversary is studying the ceasefire, not as a peace model, as a pressure playbook. And here's the military reality that makes the 14-day timeline almost irrelevant. 2 weeks of preparation benefits both sides equally. When the clock expires, Iran and America will both be better positioned for a resumed conflict than they were before the ceasefire was announced. The pause does not reduce the probability of war. It increases the scale of the war that follows. Now let me show you the specific number that proves markets have this completely wrong. Because the 12% oil drop assumed something about this ceasefire that the data directly contradicts. And when the market figures out what it missed, the move back up will not be 12%. Here's why. Oil dropped 12%. Defense stocks surged. The dollar strengthened. Every single one of these moves assume the ceasefire has momentum toward resolution. Here is what the data actually shows. Iran still controls Hormuz. Enrichment is continuing. Proxy networks are active. Lebanon is being bombed. The IRGC is threatening response. 8 allies are publicly contradicting American terms. None of the underlying factors that drove oil above $100 have changed by a single percentage point. The ceasefire did not resolve a conflict. It paused one. And when pauses collapse, the repricing is not equal and opposite. When this deal breaks down, markets will have to price in resumed conflict, plus the failure of diplomacy as a tool. That combined repricing is significantly larger than 12% in either direction for oil. Defense stocks surging on peace news is also counterintuitive when you look at what is actually happening operationally. Israeli intensification in Lebanon requires immediate ammunition resupply. American forces maintaining regional operations need sustained logistics chains. Iranian threats to respond to Lebanese strikes indicate active missile inventory preparation. The operational tempo during this ceasefire suggests increased weapons demand, not decreased demand. Every defense contractor watching these developments understands something the broader market has not priced yet. This ceasefire is not reducing military expenditure. It is redirecting it while providing cover. So let me bring every single piece of this together. Because when you line up the violations, the Lebanon Contradiction, the Hormuz closure, the incompatible proposals, and the market mispricing side by side, one conclusion becomes impossible to avoid. And it is the conclusion nobody celebrating today wants to hear. A ceasefire was announced 18 hours ago. Iran's parliament speaker listed 3 violations before day 1 ended. Lebanon is being bombed with hundreds of casualties since the announcement. The Strait of Hormuz opened for 3 hours, then closed again. The mediator, the American president, and the Israeli prime minister all have 3 different versions of what the deal covers. 8 European allies issued a joint statement contradicting Washington's position. Iran's 10-point plan and America's 15-point plan represent incompatible worldviews that no mediator on earth can bridge. Both sides are using the 14-day pause to rearm and reposition while appearing diplomatic. Markets dropped oil 12% on an agreement that has already been declared violated by one of the 2 parties. Iran's parliament speaker wrote the most honest sentence of this entire situation. The workable basis for negotiation has been openly and clearly violated even before negotiations began. In such a situation, a bilateral ceasefire or negotiations is unreasonable. He was not being dramatic. He was being precise. 2 sides agreed to pause a conflict without agreeing on what the conflict is actually about, without agreeing on what territory the ceasefire covers, without agreeing on what either side must stop doing. A pause without agreement is not a ceasefire. It is a delay, and delays end. The 14-day clock is running. Based on every piece of evidence we just walked through, the most likely outcome when it expires is not a peace deal. It is a resumption of conflict with higher stakes, more prepared militaries, fractured allied unity, and markets that celebrated too early. The ceasefire announced today may be remembered not as the beginning of peace, but as the last diplomatic gesture before something significantly larger. What do you think? Is there any version of this deal that actually holds, or did it collapse before it started? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to War Room Economics for every update as the 14-day window runs out. I will see you in the next one.